Assembly facility. So this is where we actually put our spacecraft together. As Curtis may have mentioned, JPL is a pretty enormous place. We do have the capability to manufacture nearly all the parts of our spacecraft right here on site. That being said, we never do it. And that's simply because we just don't have the time. So many of the parts we procure from other, contractors around the country, around the world in some instances, and then of course we make a fair percentage of it here. But eventually all those parts get here and we need someplace to build and test the spacecraft. So that's what this room in front of you folks is all about. All those banners you see against the back wall are all missions that have been developed in here over the years. Many of which represent more than one spacecraft, by the way. And note that as much as this is JPL's largest facility like this, it is not the only one we have like it. We kind of share a wall. That back left kind of corner connects to another room that's quite a bit taller than this, but not quite nearly as wide. And then there are smaller versions of this all over the place here at JPL. Now, the other thing about all these rooms is they're what we call clean rooms. So the idea in a clean room is that you're filtering out the dust that's in the air. And that's important for a couple reasons. I mean, I think you folks are savvy enough to know, the problem with any of these spacecraft is once they're out there, they're generally not repairable. So, if something goes bad, you generally cross your fingers and hope it's software because that you can often fix. But if it's a mechanical problem, you just hope it's not of some nature that might, hamper the vehicle's functionality or kill it altogether. But we've learned, building them in these clean environments helps ensure some reliability. There's a lot of electrical connections you need to make. You want to ensure that those are nice and clean and robust so they work. You have a lot of mechanical parts, motors and stuff on these things. You don't want to get dirt into those systems that might hamper their functionality. So those are a couple obvious reasons, and it's hilarious to us because we look back on these images from the 50s when these guys were building early spacecraft. They were literally smoking cigarettes at the time. You wonder why stuff didn't work. So those are two kind of obvious reasons perhaps, but then think about Curiosity, as I kind of teased about in the museum. Her job on Mars was to go looking for the ingredients necessary for life. Well, the problem is if you're building that robot in a room with people, what's some of the dust in the room going to be made of?
People.
That's the one, human skin. Good job. Yeah, when you're at home and there's that beam of light coming through the window and all that stuff's floating in it? Yeah, a fair percentage of that is, dead you. Delicious. So the last thing you want to do is bring that with you to Mars and then discover it later. Because you know how that conversation goes, right? Oh my God, we found life on Mars. Only moments later to be, wait a minute, you guys, that's not Mars life, that's Fred from the clean room. Right? And there's nothing we can do about that. We can't send anybody there to clean it, which means after all that drama of landing, we may no longer be able to trust the spacecraft. That's a really expensive version of, the America's Funniest Videos thing where you sneeze on the birthday cake, right? So yeah, nobody wants that to happen. So that's why these clean rooms are so terribly important. And there's a couple things we do to keep the rooms clean. One, you've probably seen those folks walking around down there in those lovely outfits. Those are what we call bunny suits. And the whole idea with the bunny suit is to keep the dirt, skin, hair, lint, all of it on you, rather than let it get into the room. And then the other thing is we have a filter system that runs 24 hours a day. So if you're looking against the back wall above and below the banners there, you see those vents? Those are blowing in the clean air. And then above our heads, which we cannot see because we're in this little bubble that sticks out from the wall, but against the wall behind us over our heads are these big intakes. The air gets drawn into those intakes and it runs through two different filter systems, carbon and HEPA systems, get most of the stuff out, and then it's blown back in across the way. To give an idea of how clean this room is, I'm going to throw a few numbers at you guys and I'll explain them. But this is what we call a class 10,000 clean room. What that means is if you had a cubic foot sample of air, so imagine that block, right? You're not allowed to have any more than 10,000 particles of dust in that sample. And tiny particles, like half micron, which is a fraction of the diameter of a human hair. So really tiny little particles we're measuring. To put that in perspective, because the question we always get is, all right, compared to what? Right, what does that mean? So figure mountain fresh air, quote unquote, let's put that in quotes. They tell us that mountain fresh air averages something on the order of about 500,000 particles of dust per cubic foot, and it gets far worse. Consider like downtown Los Angeles on a stinky hot summer day, you're looking in the low millions there. So this is way cleaner than you're ever gonna see it outside. So, the room like this, though, this is a great place to work. Coming in here is pretty hilarious. There's a couple different ways in, but there's a couple locker rooms in the back where you put your bunny suit on, and you put them on over your regular clothes. And then there's 2 different ways in. Can you guys all see the glass door in the back left corner?
Yeah.
All right, so that's one of the ways in. There's these 2 double doors up here in the front left too. But the ones you can more easily see is that, the glass door in the back. But what happens is you put your bunny suit on and a couple of these robing rooms back there. When you come in from that door, you step in from the door beyond it. So you guys on my left can see there's another door just past it, right? So you come into that other room, and when that door closes behind you and you're in that little chamber, you are given an air shower. So you have no choice. It's pretty hilarious. 2 of the walls in there are covered with these little air jets, and they blast you to pieces, and you're literally instructed to kind of hokey pokey in there for like a good 30 seconds or so before you're finally allowed in here to work. If you got allergies or asthma, greatest room ever. Like, needless to say. But the problem in a room like this is they don't allow you to bring anything with you. You can't bring any food. You can't bring any water. If you're going to bring your cell phone, you've got to swab that down with this chemical first. And just getting suited up, honestly, takes like a solid 10 minutes. And you usually need help. You need like another person to help you out. So it's one of those deals where if you're coming in here, you want to commit some time to the room. If you come in here 15 minutes later, you have to go use the facilities, as it were, then you've got to do it all over again. So, that's really the problem in a room like this. But otherwise, it's a great place. Now, the big parts, the big spacecraft components and such, those things aren't going to fit through those little doors, as you can clearly see. So they all go in and out through that rather enormous door on the left wall. You see that huge corrugated chunk of door there? That's a big door, yeah. Now, here's the deal, though. That door, when it slides over to the right, you can see the track and the rail kind of near the ceiling and floor there. It does not open to the outside. It actually opens into another room that we call an airlock that is about the same dimensions as the door. It's pretty tall, fairly skinny, but it's a good 75 feet long on the inside. On the other end of that is one of those big, like, rolly-style garage doors that opens to the outside. And there's really kind of 2 tricks to keeping a room like this clean. One is perhaps obvious. Never open both doors at the same time, right? Because you don't want to let the clean air in here mix with the dirty air outside. So, for example, if something is going to leave here, you're going to package it up. If it's a small move to some other laboratory here at JPL, then they're just going to put it in a little pouch more often than not. So it's sealed. Then they'll move it into the airlock there, close that big door, move it down to the other end. Here's the other trick, though. Before they ever roll open the outside door, so that's the outside, one of those big rolly-style garage doors, before they ever crack that thing open, they'll actually pressurize the airlock. So all that means is you pump more air into the airlock so that when we open that door, we just blow extra clean air out into Pasadena. We would much rather do that than risk drawing that stuff into the building. So that does really sort of expedite the process. And basically all the clean rooms we've got, if they don't have a full-blown airlock like this thing, they always have some sort of little, atrium or little receiving area. Because you can imagine the problem on the other end. Once that package gets to where it's going, well, now the package has been outside. So you don't want to bring the package directly into the clean room. So those always get received first, wiped out, and then into the clean rooms. So, it may not be anything quite as big as this thing. Sometimes this is just a curtained off little room, but that's really the whole idea, is to prevent that dirt from making it into these clean rooms. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the room in and of itself. As far as what we're working on downstairs, there are 2 big components that are both part of the next Rover mission. So we were talking about Mars 2020. Some of you may be somewhat aware of that, but here's the thing. We're going to be sending another Curiosity-sized rover to Mars to launch in 2020 to arrive early 21. Scientifically speaking, it's going to be a different ballgame this time around because we found those ingredients that I was talking about so early on in the Curiosity rover mission. They were able to kind of change the scope of 2020 such that the instrumentation now makes that spacecraft a life detection mission. So we're going to Mars with that rover to start sniffing around for life. So that's going to be amazing. The other thing we're going to do with that rover is start collecting samples. So we've got a coring drill. We can actually drill into the rocks and take these core samples. We can take the dirt from the, around us and collect those things. We're going to put them in these little tubes and then try and hermetically seal these tubes. And then we're just going to deposit them in little piles along the way in the hopes that somewhere down the road, we will be able to go collect those samples and bring them home. We don't have the technology to even do that yet. So this is kind of, all new stuff. But, you guys know the end game, perhaps, is to eventually send humans to Mars. But there's a lot of stuff to suggest that life could potentially happen there, perhaps on its own. So we know once we send humans there, all bets are off. We're going to contaminate Mars. So we want to kind of answer those questions way before we get those people there. So the new rover won't even land, like I said, till 2021. Figure we need a few years to start collecting samples anyway, if all goes well. So we're hoping by the time that is kind of wrapped up, the technology to bring those samples home might exist. So we'll see. We're crossing our fingers for that, but that's really the plan. To kind of, get our hands wet, feet wet, as it were, collecting samples to see what that even takes. We've never tried that before. See how complicated that process really is, and then start doing the life detection science. So that'll be cool. But the parts that you see are both, affiliated. The rover herself isn't down here yet, but the big piece right smack in the middle of the room might look somewhat familiar to you folks. Do you remember the sky crane? The rocket pack that put Curiosity on the ground? That's the actual sky crane for the next mission. So when it's almost done, we're that far ahead on that one. So and that's got a really important job to do. You guys remember, get us on the ground safely and then fly out the way. Go crash somewhere. So the only thing that's really missing from it that I'm aware of right now is, if you look at it now, you see those red arms kind of coming towards us that sort of terminate near the floor with that little triangular little fixture there. There will eventually be a radar attached to that. And the radar actually feeds the altitude data back to the rover. So if you think about, remember those cables that the two are hanging, between one another? Two of those cables are actually data cables. So the rocket pack itself has no brains of its own. So it's actually just sending all the images it's taking and all the radar data into the rover, which is then doing all the calculations to control the rocket pack above it. So, so that's what that is there. So the radar has yet to be attached, but everything else is getting really close to done. And then in the back right corner, way over there, that piece that kind of looks like a wheel on its side back there, that's actually a piece that I don't believe was in a video you saw, but it's been on all the rover missions. It's a part that's called the cruise stage. So if you think about the rover itself and the way it was flying to Mars in that little capsule, remember there's the heat shield on the front and there's the back shell where the parachute comes out? The cruise stage is actually an entirely separate spacecraft that gets attached to the back. It's almost the same diameter as the rest of the capsule, so it's covering up the parachute. Its main job is to fly us to Mars. It will eventually have solar panels on it that will provide it its own electricity. If they were on it now, they'd actually be facing the floor. So, you can kind of imagine its orientation. There's actually a couple pictures on the wall behind you guys of it, some engineering drawings and stuff. Look for a piece called the cruise stage. For you folks over here by me, it's this piece on the back right here. So, but perhaps more, so like I was talking about the getting us to the right place, right? So the thing is, you guys know this too, it's not like we're just trying to hit Mars at any random spot. The science teams originally had 12 locations they picked. Over a year ago, they narrowed it down to 3, and they've been fighting it out ever since. But eventually they're going to pick one of those spots, and it's going to be our navigating team's task to nail that spot. So the cruise stage actually has a whole propulsion system on it, and actually it's all installed now. You can actually see it. So if you're looking down at it, you're going to see those 2 gold kind of spheres there. Underneath those insulating blankets are these titanium spheres that will eventually be filled with this chemical propellant called hydrazine. But next to each tank, just adjacent to it, there's a little tripod sticking out. Can you guys see those? One is facing the back corner, the other is facing us, basically. And the ones facing us, a little more apparent, have that little red kind of cross on it. Those little red pieces are just protective coverings. Underneath those little covers, and you can almost see the ones actually facing the back wall because the covers are on the opposite side, are these teeny tiny little thrusters, you guys. They are kind of brass colored, and they are not a whole lot bigger, if at all bigger, than like the nozzle on a whipped cream container. They're really tiny, and you can just about spy them there, a couple of them. But those tiny little thrusters allow us to do the navigational course corrections necessary as we fly. We can slow it down, speed it up, change the angles, whatever we have to do to make sure we're going to nail that spot that the science team will eventually select. But here's the thing, that piece is covering up the parachute. So right before we enter the Martian atmosphere, that piece will actually get jettisoned off the back, and it will literally just tumble and burn up in the Martian atmosphere. So it's totally critical, but also designed to be totally disposable. As it is, you guys know, as is the nature of this kind of exploration, we do have to leave a few things on the surface just to get there, but we try to limit that. So for a part like this that we can get rid of, they try to get rid of it. So it's designed to vaporize in the atmosphere there. So that's a really important part of the puzzle. So the last thing I wanted to mention to you folks is we have yet to name the Rover. All the Rovers in the past have been named in contests by school kids. Every single one of them. They are planning on doing the same thing for Mars 2020 because that's the lamest name ever. All right. Now, they tell us the contest should hopefully be announced either at the end of this year or early next year, which would likely correspond with the actual rover moving in here. Let me tell you what they did last time. They're telling us they're hoping it will be the same for the next mission. But here's what they did last time. So they announced this contest. It was open to, basically school kids up through 12th grade. What you had to do was pick a name and then write an essay to support that name. Why was that name important to you? What compelled you to come up with that, right? So we got a few thousand of these essays from kids all over the place. Somehow NASA narrowed it down to the top, I want to say it was like 12, and they put them on the NASA website. And then anybody that could go to the website could vote to help us pick the name. So after, I think it was a 3-month-long contest, and when they ended it, Curiosity received the most votes, so that was the winning name. And that's when they revealed the winning essayist. Little 6th grader from Kansas City, from Lenexa, Kansas, actually. Her name was Clara Ma, this little Chinese-American gal. And they did some absolutely ridiculous stuff for her. So first thing they did was fly her and her family here to JPL, top to bottom tour of this place. But then they got Clara in a bunny suit, which was hilarious. Because, and I remember this going up to this event, they called every bunny suit manufacturer they could find. Nobody makes a kid's bunny suit. Clara was like 4 foot, at best. So they had to wrap the arms and legs in tape to make it stay on her, which was so funny. But then we had a media day down there. We had Channel 5 and Channel 9 or 11. One of the other local news stations was down there. And she got to hand sign her name on parts of the spacecraft. So her name is handwritten on Mars. Not a lot of Earthlings get to say that. I don't know anybody else that got to sign any of these things. So that was ridiculous enough. Then they sent her and her family to Florida to go watch the launch, which included top to bottom tour of Kennedy Space Center. Then they brought Clara back for the night we landed. And do you remember in the video, all those guys and gals were wearing those matching blue shirts? They ordered Clara a tiny little blue shirt, and she was in the room with the rest of those guys and gals watching that landing that night. She wasn't on camera, but she was in there. And then, I guess it was like 2 summers ago now, maybe 3, she actually interned at another NASA center. So yeah, as we like to say around here, she's flying her nerd flag nice and high. So when we started talking about this, when they were kind of teasing us about the contest about 2 or 3 months ago, I Googled her and I found her essay. So you can actually find her essay about why she came up with the name for Curiosity and all that. Was amazing, especially considering she was in 6th grade. And then she blogged, I didn't read the whole blog, but she blogged about her experience at that NASA center a couple summers back. So if you're interested in this and you got kids, in that age range in your world, perhaps have them or you subscribe to our email newsletter or NASA's email newsletter. We're not going to spam you guys. It's good stuff. But they tell us that's one of the ways the contest will be announced in one of those emails with all the rules and such for it. And, we'll see how it goes this time. But, cross your fingers. Should be cool. All right. You guys all good? All right. Awesome. All right. So we're going to go ahead and head on off to our next spot.